Meanwhile, the father of the fugitive whistleblower Edward Snowden has set out the terms under which he thinks his son would voluntarily come back to the US. Firstly, he should not be detained or imprisoned before trial, should not be subject to a gag order, and should be tried in a location of his choosing. That is according to a letter from Snowden Sr. released to the media. And all of this comes as the 30-year-old ex-CIA employee remains stuck in diplomatic limbo in the transit zone of Moscow's Sheremetyevo airport. Well, let's take a look at where Snowden could potentially be heading next. Cuba appears to be a tricky option at the moment. The US State Department said back in 2006 that Havana had promised to stop accepting US fugitives. Iceland has held informal talks on whether to grant Snowden asylum, and WikiLeaks affiliates are now awaiting comment from the Interior Ministry there. Venezuela, meanwhile, says it would be likely to grant the whistleblower refuge, with the President Nicolas Maduro applauding the man's bravery. And another South American destination, Ecuador, looks promising, but that country cannot yet grant him asylum because he's not on Ecuadorian soil. The whistleblower's plight has captivated the global media, but investigative journalist Duncan Campbell says the real story is being sidelined.
A lot depends on Russia, but I think the Russian game will just be to stand back and say he's on international territory, we can do nothing, and wait for other players to act. But I do think that the focus is wrong, because all of this distraction about Snowden and where he is and what he might do next has completely undermined the tremendous gravity of the successive documents and revelations that he's made about the scope of American and Allied spying on the civil and commercial affairs of the world. I think that many Americans that recognize the true values for which their forefathers fought from the War of Independence onwards would see in Snowden a real hero. But that is never going to be reflected in the demographics when the press is so tainted and disgracefully so silent in simply reporting what he's got to say. If there was a dissident in Russia or China or the Middle East speaking out in the way that Snowden is doing, it would have massive coverage. That's not happening.
Meanwhile, the US Army has restricted access to the Guardian newspaper's website for thousands of defence personnel across the country. The move against the British Daily comes after its revelations of the NSA's spying activities. RT Sarah Firth has more.
This information is regarding reports in the US media that the US military seems to have admitted to them that they have been filtering content regarding government surveillance programs. And this came on the back of reports about complaints from a US base in San Francisco that the staff there weren't able to access any of the UK Guardian website and only partial access to the US Guardian website. They said it seems that this is to do with something called network hygiene. Now, this is preserving their system from any threat externally or internally. And I spoke to the MOD press office here in the UK and asked them if anything similar was, of course, being done with the British military. And they told me that this wasn't happening. What was being done in the US right now wasn't happening here, although they did say that in relation to their computer systems in the military, there is some information that is sometimes restricted for security purposes. It is raising questions about that suppression of information, and to talk more about that, I'm joined by political analyst Rodney Shakespeare. Thank you very much for joining us. I think the first question to ask is, these are classified documents that have been released by a whistleblower, and of course in a very similar way to what we saw with WikiLeaks, although there's been this public release, they're still classified documents. So, I mean, are the US military justified in, preserving their system in this way?
It's nothing to do with network hygiene. It is straight attempt to suppress and to control what is being read and understood by, in this case, the soldiers. The other side of the coin is the American government and the British government are looking at all the internet, all the mobile appliances, all the landline telephones of you, me, American citizens, British citizens, and every single person watching this program. So it's a little sign ridiculous sign, because those soldiers can actually get hold of that information.
Of course, they have mobile phones and computer access elsewhere.
No problem at all.
Yeah.
But it's part of an overall increasing encroachment on free speech and access to information.
The Department of Defense actually said in their response that they're not going to block websites from the American public in general, and that would violate, they said, the highest held principle of upholding and defending the Constitution. So they've made it clear this is just the parts of the US system.
They are lying. When they talk about democracy, they arm throat slitters, gas chokers and the head choppers. When they talk about free speech, they are shutting down as many things as they do. You've no reason now to believe one single thing that the American government says. The bottom line of all this, they're out of control. The information, and they normally do it by omission in the American channels. Not so much they lie, they just don't tell the truth.
Well, we're going to take a quick break now, but there's still plenty to come.